And we're recording. Full screen and mouse is off. So
right.
What was it? Man, I should.
For those who missed our 3-minute break, I'm on drink number 3, and Neil finally decided to get it started here. It doesn't make friends drink alone.
I realized I was being a bit of a dick.
Yeah, Jesus, man. So, yeah, I mean, where we left off there. Okay, here's just a mental thought, and then we should probably leave free will mostly alone, because at the end of the day, we're never going to prove any of this stuff or disprove it. It's just a thought process, right? It's just intellectual stroke fest going on. But,
I was going to say intellectual masturbation, so that was...
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're in sync, what can you say? Maybe you had no choice but to say that, because I led you into it, but...
And here I was thinking we were more Backstreet Boys than in sync.
Oh, shit. Well, cheers, buddy.
Cheers.
Yeah. Okay, so here's the...
Your free... Where was it? Free will. If there is no free will, what do you do about God in your head?
The paradox is that if you had zero limitations, you would have nothing to do, because everything would already be done, and therefore there would be no will to exert, limited will or otherwise. It doesn't really matter. And the paradox is that human beings are obviously incredibly limited, even though we're very capable compared to other animals. But we're very limited in what we can actually do, and yet we're driven to do all sorts of things. I mean, whether you call that will or otherwise, it doesn't really matter. But
it sure feels like will, if nothing else.
Yeah, I mean, and that might be an illusion, right? It's possible that we really are just sort of playing out, essentially, I wouldn't call it predestined, because that sort of implies God, but we're just a product of physics and natural processes, so to speak, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But if you imagine a person, right? Imagine a person with no hunger, no sexual desire. They're not tired. They're not lonely, so they don't need to associate with anybody. They have everything that they need, right?
And all of their that they need. Or everything.
Yeah, and all of their drives are essentially fulfilled. Well, what would that person be doing? Because that person would essentially be more free than a person with needs. And if that person was immortal, what would there be left for them to do? There'd be nothing left to do. So even if you had free will and you were truly, the more free you are, the less you'd be doing anyway.
Well, I think that's so. When it comes to the Bible, I think that's almost where it does possibly get an idea that I might think right. Like if there's nothing for them to do, why not make something that is flawed? And
so that there's something to do.
I don't see the point of making something that's flawed so that they praise you. I've never understood that. That sounds stupid. However, I could imagine someone, as I'm sure anybody that might listen to this, or you can, I could imagine somebody that has nothing to do and is bored out of their fucking minds watching TV and just voyeuring their way to oblivion. Like, just put the TV on and watch these flawed creatures just go at it. Like, this is entertaining. And you have every channel, and it's real? Well, as we, I believe, mentioned off camera, we have, if not been, known some voyeurism items, so...
Yeah, we shouldn't get into that one, but that's...
We should not.
Yeah, I mean, well, seriously, yeah, but basically it's kind of like you're just hypothesizing, like maybe God created us just to watch TV, but,
That's what
I would put it to you this way. like, where am I at with the whole God thing? I mean, I hate to echo the guy's wording on this because I am a bit of a fan of Peterson's or whatever, but it's like, it really does depend on what you mean by God. It's like, when people talk about this stuff, it's like, well, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah.
I mean, I still call myself an atheist. That's never going to change at this point because there's just too much contradiction to the actual theistic texts to accept any of them as being literally true. Okay, for me, that's just not on the table. So I want to make that really clear before I talk about this, or people are going to just think I'm stupid. And no offense, by the way, to like the more religious people. I do actually respect religious belief in a way that I never did years ago, and I think that we need some room for that.
Yeah, I think you and I are on the same page roughly there, because when I first left religion, I was, I wouldn't say militant, Jesus Christ, not militant atheist, but it's...
Anti-theist?
Yeah, anti-theist. I really thought down on people, like, it's so little thought process to leave this. How have you not left this? But since someone on YouTube wrote Jordan Peterson, the next Hitchens, I was like, oh, how can I avoid that? So I started watching that, and I thought, this guy's gotta be, I mean, of course this guy's an atheist. And then I watched a religious debate with him, and there were a few times going through it, I was like, well, wait a minute, that's an argument against atheism. And then he'd keep talking, and he's like, yeah, still sounds like an atheist. Yeah, that's an argument against religion. Wait a minute, that one was an argument. And I was like, what the hell am I listening to? Oh, shit. And if I were to respect religion, which now I say that I do, to a very complicated, not easy degree, not easy to understand, but a complicated degree. And Peterson brought me there. Yeah. And that being said, I still respect, I'm still, as you said, just as far as I can tell, there's no way that I'm going to stop being an atheist at this point. As far as I can tell, I may be wrong, but he brought me there.
I will say that for myself, I mean, definitely Peterson helped me to get to some of those positions or those changes too, but it's a weird thing. I mean, for me, my respect for religion is really more, it's kind of, you could almost call this spiritual in a sense, is that I actually respect the struggle of what our ancestors had to go through to painfully articulate patterns of behavior so that we could actually just get along well enough and get as far as we did. I mean,
yeah.
And it would be a bit of a shame, I think, to lose that. And yeah, you can lose the creationism and you can lose the dogma, but maybe have a little bit of respect for the fact that our culture got us far enough along as it did. And even though we both obviously talk about the Enlightenment, the Enlightenment didn't emerge in a vacuum. And maybe something like that could have happened in China or otherwise too. But, there are also different kinds of cultural and religious truths that were developed in other places of the world as well. And those truths were not easy to come by. I mean, it's really hard to put yourself in the shoes of someone that was living 30,000 years ago and figure out what the hell sacrifice meant, or the future, or anything like that. That's some pretty staggering development, and just a little inkling of respect for that process. But I'm atheist because, again, I think that the fundamental, literal interpretations of those texts are, they're just too flawed to be written by an actual creator or inspired by an omniscient creator. I can't bring myself anywhere even close to that.
The shortest I've been able to put it is, you mean to tell me that an omniscient, all-knowing, all-powerful creature was a monoglot and wrote a book that has to be in this one language and is...
Yeah.
Fuck off. No. I can't buy that. If you buy that, what does that say about your creator? The guy's a little bitch.
And didn't give us a Jesus for every place in the planet so that we, could all know about it and not go to hell when we die would be,
all of
that'd
the
be good.
implications of that sentence and he didn't give us a Jesus in all areas. He just gave it in this one.
Just in the Middle East,
I like all of the implications of that. Like, no, Jesus is fucking gold. If they put him there in other places?
Yeah.
Where would we be? I like that.
I mean, what I do appreciate with the Peterson thing is it's the psychological interpretation of these things. Like,
oh, right. So what do you mean by God? Yeah. Because
what the hell do you mean? Because, I mean, to the ancient people, the gods.
There's so
the gods
many of them.
were everywhere. Yeah.
Yep.
And actually, the ancient Jews were. The ancient Jews were almost polytheist. They weren't monotheist because they actually believed in the gods of their enemies. That's why they had to go destroy them, and that's why God said that He was a jealous God in the Ten Commandments.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I can see an argument for that.
The ancient Jews didn't believe in, just a creator God of the universe as such. It's like religion has already been reformed by science to a degree, unless you're talking about strictly fundamentalist people.
Well, I don't know as much about the ancient Jewish religion believing in other gods. I think that acknowledging that other people believe in gods isn't exactly acknowledging that they're real. However,
I think it is.
If that's the case, I acknowledge that there's religious people that truly believe in it all over the place, and I don't think that they're real. So I disagree.
Oh, the gods are fake, but they're just a figment of people's imagination.
Oh yes.
So if you were living back then. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that they believe that they're real, and we should stop them because that idea could grow even if it's false and not real. So that they might not have been polytheistic, but I do know that concept. I understand where you're going, or I understand this because I think the Romans and many polytheistic religions, when they did conquer, were like, yeah, there are more than one. There are many. You may continue to follow yours, but you must also respect ours. And I know that maybe I don't know about the Greeks, but I know that the Romans kind of absorbed some of their conquered deities, and we're like, yeah, let's bring this in. Which is really cool.
That's the interesting thing about the development of monotheism that we kind of underestimate, is the psychological development of people that went along with that. So if you have, in the ancient world, people basically used their imagination to populate the world with gods to explain things that they didn't understand. So if you're an ancient Greek and you believed in the god of war, the god of wrath, the god of love, etc., those are just emotions, right? And you'd say that, each emotion is represented by a different god and that each has its own source, its own power in the world. And the shift to monotheism is psychologically to say that all things have the same source, that all things came from one in the beginning. And that's, I'm not saying that's belief in the Big Bang. I'm just saying that, the psychological progression is there, though, to allow these kinds of things to eventually sort of happen.
I got fucked up a bit, again, with Sapiens, and there's parts in there that I disagree with, but there was a chapter about religion with polytheism where he was writing about that many of these polytheistic religions actually do believe in a all-powerful thing, like the fates, or fate. Even the deities have to follow fate, which could, I suppose, be argued to be a single all-powerful deity that's above all of the others. So I don't know. And then the other
that's pretty Gnostic, hey? Yeah.
There it is. There's the A.
Yeah. The Gnostics kind of talk about stuff like that. Like there's sort of a one true God that we don't really know, but we sort of represent it in all these other avenues. And it's all really interesting to me. But
I know nothing about Gnosticism.
Let me ask you a question then. What do you think about deism? Because that doesn't come with any dogma. It's just sort of like, I reject all these religious stories as being untrue, but I still sort of believe in some sort of higher power. Or a creator of some type. Undefined creator.
Fine. It's no skin off my back. I don't care. Sure.
It seems to me that it doesn't have the potential to devolve into theocracy and all the worst things that religion could typically bring about with it, right? I mean,
I see it as like this neutral item that's like, fine. Okay. What do I do with it? How do you see it?
Oh, yeah, it's like the free will thing. Well, it's just intellectual masturbation. I mean, we don't know and we can't. Yeah. Okay.
If we keep digging down with science to figure out what are the main items that drive everything, one could argue that I or you or others are deistic because we say that this thing is a huge driving force. Now, I say huge driving force because I don't think there's likely to be one driving force, but I don't fucking know. People smarter than me look for the one equation. But I suppose they could see it as I could see some people arguing that that's almost deism.
Yeah. I mean, I personally think, I'm agnostic about it. Like, I've always tell people I'm atheist, but I'm not a deist. Because I'm open. I'm agnostic. It's just that, I wouldn't call myself agnostic about theism. Because I'm not agnostic about the tooth fairy. And I'm not agnostic about Santa Claus. But I am agnostic about exactly how our universe started. Or, whatever that means. And I think there are certain definitions of it that, in theory, you could sort of loosely label them as, like, a deity. It's just not a deity that, like, gave us instructions.
Is conscious and makes choices, or I don't know.
Yeah, it's nothing like that. It's not like the classical ideas of God, but, like, to me, maybe that sounds absolutely silly, and that's fine, but I just don't see any potential negative, to exploring those ideas or declaring your agnosticism. Like, to me, agnosticism just means I don't know. And I think it's a respectable position for people to say that, I don't know anything about this, but I know enough about the world to say I confidently don't believe in the theistic representations of the cosmos. I think they're explaining different things, and you shouldn't use those to explain objective reality. You try and maybe take out of them, the things that are useful, like, okay, how do you act in the world? But you have to be careful with that because, you might end up, stoning adulterers and stuff too, but.
Because even if something is almost certainly, even if it's not good, it's successful. So at least some things within there, they wouldn't exist without being successful. Some things in their teachings must, at least to some extent, have enough good in them to help one survive and help one prosper. Otherwise, we wouldn't have got to this point in the first place.
To me, if you look at religion and the problems of religion, you could think about it this way. When I was younger, and I know a lot of atheists think this way, when I was younger, it's very, very, very easy to, even though atheism isn't a belief system, you can easily, through your critique of religion, you can easily map that critique out onto reality as you see it today and say that, hey, all these problems that we have of misogyny and slavery and all these things were historically reinforced through religion. But
yes.
The problem is that those ideas predate religion.
Yeah, there was
just like morality does. Just like morality does.
One of my girlfriends really beat the shit out of me on that. Not physically.
Mm-hmm.
So there was something, and I really, she's still got one of the greatest minds that I've ever dealt with, and I'm really appreciative of having had her in my life. Where she was a lawyer, so she loved to argue, and I mean I like to argue and talk. So there was something, I don't remember what it was, but I noticed that it was her fallback on everything. Everything could be explained by this, and I pointed that out one time, and then she said, yeah, well, all of your arguments fall back to it's religion's fault. It's like, oh, shit.
Yeah. Atheism
she's right.
Atheism actually, it can devolve into ideology.
Yeah, and since then...
I mean, there's no dogma to do that, but it can happen. Like, we know that's true. Because if you blame religion for everything, it's too simple. It's
Yep.
You know,
there were issues before there was ever religion. There were issues before there was language. There was issues before there was consciousness, arguably.
Yeah, and way more issues, by the way. Like, that's the other thing, is that we take for granted that those religions wouldn't even have taken root if they didn't actually help some problems in the beginning.
Well, that's what I was just saying a moment ago. They have to have something in it that helps to some degree.
By the way, I won't argue that it's obviously also true that religion also, as a cultural institution, also made some other problems linger longer than maybe they could have as well. But the problem is that if you lose all of them, you actually don't just advance to the next level. You can devolve to what you had before. I mean, that's what we were talking about on my own page here the other day, is talking about monogamy. Is that cultures that were monogamous had a significant drop in violence. And when we lose monogamy and move back towards polygamy, like, polygamy is not progressive.
I think
polygamy was the norm.
About this in the group too.
Yeah, polygamy was the norm before monogamy, right? Monogamy is a technological advancement that is far more modern than people realize. There's nothing new about polygamy. That's a natural state of unchecked sexual libertine behavior without any kind of roadmap for how to act properly in the world. And I'm not, by the way, people can be polygamous if they want, and some people can do it just fine. Like, there are some people that are sexually mature enough to be able to handle that. And you know what? All the power to you.
Yeah.
I know my own limits, and I know I couldn't handle it. And I know that most people couldn't handle it. And most people, even if they don't believe in religion, they still understand that, oh, geez, yeah, monogamy's right for me. And most people choose that lifestyle. And yeah, if you pulled the carpet back out on our society, it's like we think, oh, we'll be polygamy, we'll be free, and that's progress. But it's like, actually, no, it's not. That's not progress. That's just change. And you have to distinguish between change and progress. Like, not all change is progress.
Relative too.
Sure. Well, I mean, if you take Sam Harris' view, which I think is a pretty reasonable view about morality, at least it's the lion's share of it. I don't think it's thorough enough, but if you're trying to avoid suffering and you accept that as your axiom for morality, then there's actually some serious problems that come along with the degeneration of monogamy.
Yeah, because it causes suffering for a much larger audience, one could say. And I think that Peterson in his 12 Rules was saying that that's kind of his axiom too, is that suffering is the most true thing that there is. So it could be argued to be, to some extent, his God kind of thing, because it's the one thing that he says, I can't get away from. So
there's a difference between the two, though, right?
To fight against it. Yes, there is a difference, but they both kind of come to this avoid suffering and try to alleviate it as much as possible.
Yes.
But
yeah,
we've talked about this before where my history in relationships and sex has kind of been played around with that a little bit myself, and I choose monogamy because I think it's better for society and it's better for and easier for me.
It's better for you.
I can't handle it, and I know that I'm not one of the ruthless people that could take advantage of the system and just spread. And the other part of it is, I kind of agree that it's people that are more sexually mature in a way, because sex is no longer only about reproduction. It's about fun. And as long as you're really healthy with it, and as long as you control emotions for yourself and everybody that's involved with it, I could totally see that polygamy is the thing to move forward with. I could totally see the argument for that. But holy shit, it's not easy to manage, because we're all still mammals, and we all still sexually reproduce, and that all that biology is still driving behind us, no matter what we want, and it's
well,
for what it's done to society. I agree with it, and I can't handle it, like you said.
There's what you think you want, and then there's also the things that you unconsciously desire.
Yeah.
So I mean, if you're a person who believes that, okay, I can pursue these sexual pursuits, and you have the technology today to be safe in that endeavor. You can use condoms and birth control and all sorts of things, and that's awesome. Like, I mean, I actually encourage people when they're a bit younger to, actually experiment, but safely, and actually go and do that, because you can today. And, having a healthy sex life with your partner is a huge plus, by the way, for the long term. So, our morality has changed. Like, I'm not really even though I probably come across this way online, I'm not really all that much of a traditionalist. I just understand, why some of those things were the norm and why we developed them. Because before we had birth control, I mean, that's a very new thing. Human beings have been around for at least 2.5 million years, or human-like beings.
Yeah.
We've had birth control for 50 years. Well, how much evolution has occurred since we've had the birth control pill?
Not a whole lot.
Right? Zero. Virtually zero. So, at the end of the day, the underlying psychology of our desires hasn't changed. And you can experiment. Yeah.
Society has changed.
Some people can be more free, and that's, like, again, all the power to them if they're mature enough and responsible enough to do that. And, that's great. But there's a reason that most people want monogamy. And, like, it's kind of intrinsic. It's sort of ingrained in us at this point. Because women had no choice for 2.5 million years. You couldn't sleep around.
I've got to ask you a question. Mm-hmm. Is it, so it's ingrained, is it more societally or socially ingrained, or more physically ingrained? Because you were just mentioning how we have not changed effectively biologically at all in that amount of time since polygamy was the norm.
I think that, I mean, it's both, but I think that the biology is the lion's share that we just don't talk about. Because, look, I mean, if for 2.5 million years, the potential for suffering for women for being sexually libertine was so extreme. I mean, sexually transmitted diseases is one thing, but obviously high risk of pregnancy, and pregnancy itself, up until we've had modern medicine, is a massive risk. I mean, we've paid for this. This is the penalty of having big brains, right? Is that passing a baby's skull out of your vagina is like, that's some scary shit, man. Not easy. I mean, that's not easy today. So many women died giving birth that the problem is if there wasn't a structure built around you to help support you through that process, your survival chances were so slim that it's just too risky. And if the mother died in that situation, of course the child's going to die too. You have to have a culture and a society, and also you need something to tie a man to a woman long term, because
to raise
the natural male,
of that one item.
The natural
the risk
male
of having many and not having a support structure is raising the likelihood of dying in the process.
Yeah. And what people don't understand about evolution is evolution can't work backwards. I mean, the fact that human babies' brains are a certain size and their heads are a certain size is like a vestigial trait. You can't go backwards and get rid of that. So, I mean, yes, of course our culture's changed a lot, but for men,
real quick there, you could probably get smaller heads and smaller brains, just like some salamanders have lost their eyes. But you are right in that, that's those salamanders that no longer have their eyes have DNA stacked on top of the DNA that says to have eyes. So that being said, I know nothing about evolution, or DNA, but I do know that what you mean by it doesn't go back. It doesn't get rid of that. It's building on top of it.
The genes for those salamanders are still there. I mean, you could look at you could look at your vas deferens. It's the line that runs from the male testes to your penis, and male testicles used to be up here in our abdomen, right? Before our testes actually dropped. Okay, the vas deferens comes up from your testicles, up around your pubic bone, and then back down to your penis.
So it's kind of like
it's not very efficient.
It's kind of like the thing that goes. What is it? The laryngeal nerve wraps around your larynx. It's kind of like that.
It's exactly like that. That's why the laryngeal nerve in a giraffe is the whole fucking neck back up around, right?
That's a way more fun example. The vas deferens. It's like the neck except with your penis.
Yeah. Well, hey, look. Why do people think the brain is so magical that it's exempt from these things? I mean, seriously, right? I don't mean to be condescending, but why do people think the brain is so magical to be exempt from this? And especially if
design or unnecessary vestigial or things that get in the way kind of thing? Inefficiencies.
Right. I mean, the point is we have structures of our brain that are very, very old, and they don't go away unless they're not used, right? So, the reason why a salamander maybe could lose its eyes is because it lived in a cave where it's so dark and it was there for so long that eventually it would have a random mutation that would eliminate its eyesight, and it didn't matter because it didn't affect your sexual selection. You couldn't see anyway.
It reduced the likelihood of a critical hit.
Right. It made you less vulnerable. That's a good point. It actually increased your survival chances, right? For that salamander to lose its eyes, because the environment was dark anyway, so it didn't matter. But look, human females, they like to choose men that are somewhat risk takers and brave and, this and that, and we don't come from a background where men and women were one-to-one passed down. We're descended from twice as many females as we are males. Females are more selective than males. They're more picky than we are. Basically, for every woman that had a child, every other man had 2 children. Okay? So it's always been that way, and that's what we're evolved from, is that the most desirable males are more desirable than the most desirable females. And why is that? Well, because there's a risk, right? There's a huge risk to females. And for men, the natural strategy, just like any other mammal, is actually to spread your seed around as much as you can. So, that's an argument for polygamy, but that doesn't work for women. right? If you're
still
sort of
have that-
biologic,
You still have that
Yeah.
physical risk of life, and you still have that gestation period and that carrying of the child on top of each other.
And to be fair, our medical situation has changed, and our contraceptions, and everything that has changed. So, the risk to women, thankfully, is way less than it ever has been, and I think that's great. Like, we're all going to agree that's awesome,
Yes.
right? But at the end of the day, the emotional impact of your sex life that motivates you to act in certain behaviors has not changed. And
right. So
part of that,
so here's where the biology essentially hasn't changed. So that's the part where we were talking about a moment ago, until essentially hasn't changed since monogamy has more or less taken over in the West. And what was the other part that you were saying? Like, I'm in agreement with you, but there was some flaw in the logic, it seemed, for a moment.
Maybe there's a gap in the logic, yeah.
It seems like there is, but I remembered that there was an argument for it again. Where, shoot, I don't remember off the top of my head. I don't remember. Fuck it. But I remember that what the argument back to monogamy was to some extent, because those feelings are underneath and they are still there, and they're essentially the same as what they were like back in when polygamy was the main one. And you mentioned that the biology is still driving at least females towards monogamy. And then I was thinking, well, how's that the case if the biology hasn't really changed? But I think you are right. The biology hasn't changed. They are still aiming to reproduce the likelihood. And if you look at, I think it was in Steven Pinker's Better Angels of Our Nature. Did you read it by chance? It would make it easier for me. Do you remember that?
Unfortunately, no.
Crap! Okay, there was a section in there where he's mentioning how underneath you can reverse engineering find those numbers that support, well, why would someone self-destruct when that guarantees that they are no longer going to be spreading, like succeeding at all? And when they reverse engineer some of these numbers, at least under some extent, and you can make the argument for